Good Game, I'm Bajo.
And I'm Hex.
Games that test the brain and our endurance this week, Hex.
That's true. Coming up, we wander through the fractured memories of Ether 1.
Anyway, it has. You can't trust it.
And action RPG Bound by Flame tests us with its challenging combat.
Now that I see you, I understand why you'd rather not show up in person.
Also, we solve a couple of pocket puzzlers with Hitman Go and Monument Valley.
Plus, Goose looks at how last week's federal budget will impact the local games industry.
Australia's always had a really good heritage in creativity in games, and I think the goal of the fund was to stimulate that.
But first, can you name the game?
I am certain that this inactivity will not last. Let's retire. You'll be in better humour tomorrow.
Reason speaks. Let's to bed.
First up in our mobile roundup is Hitman Go, a turn-based twist on the stealth franchise.
Hex, I can't say I was ever a fan of or had even tried the ancient Chinese board game Go.
Well, it does require patience and consideration, Bajo.
Yeah, it's not my strongest personality traits, but after trying Hitman Go, I can see the appeal.
Based on the mechanics of the almost 2,500-year-old board game, Hitman Go sees Agent 47 taking out goons and high-profile targets, creating diversions, and collecting briefcases filled with what we can only assume are juicy secrets.
Hex, it took a few levels of trial and error, but then after a while, I really got into this.
Yeah, those early sections do give you that feeling of, well, is that it? But before you know it, you're 4 or 5 levels in, and then that one more go feeling starts to kick in.
I like the visual style too. Each map is broken up into smaller mini-maps that are presented just like a boxed board game, complete with playing pieces. And you stealth your way through a variety of environments like mansions, multi-level buildings, and outdoor garden areas.
Yeah, I'm glad they didn't try to shoehorn the Hitman console game onto a phone, but I don't know, did you find this maybe a little bit too clinical and cold?
Well, that's one of the things I really liked about this game. Agent 47 is a cold, calculating character who thinks before he moves, maps out his hit, and then strikes at the precise moment. And I think the tone is well executed.
Yeah, but the Hitman games also have a good mix of personality and humour, and I just wish they'd managed to work that in a little bit more here. I do think this is a good example of thinking outside the box, though, when it comes to adapting big franchises for mobile gaming. I'm giving it 7 rubber chickens.
That level that played Ave Maria in the background did make for one very intense bus ride to work. I'm giving it 8.
Another puzzler that scratched our brains was the shifting world of Monument Valley. Ida is a cursed silent princess searching for redemption through this mind-bending landscape.
Hex, I'm impressed you got so much subtext from this very simple game.
That's all how you interpret it, Bajo.
Much like Hitman Go, it has humble beginnings, but before long you're solving puzzles and making your way from one point of the map to another.
Where this is different, though, is where it draws its gameplay and creative influences from. Conceptual artist MC Escher and games like Echo Chrome are key to its art style and puzzle-solving mechanics. In spite of these obvious influences, though, it does put its own spin on things and stamps Monument Valley with its own identity.
I do like how things get more complex as you progress through the game's 10 levels, but at the end I never really felt challenged. Once you have the hang of this, it's quite easy to look at a level, turn and slide a few levers and cogs, and guide Ida through to the next puzzle. You never really spend more than a few minutes in each environment, which does make for a very short game.
Yeah, I did finish this in just one sitting, but for me that allowed me to get the most out of the story. I really wanted to know what was awaiting the princess at the end of her journey and why she was collecting all these orbs and why are the screeching bird people so nasty.
I did want this to be a bit more challenging, and maybe it's a little expensive for a mobile game, but still I think it's beautiful and very well made, so I'm giving it 7 out of 10 rubber chickens.
Yeah, I mean, my only real criticism is that it doesn't really warrant more than a single playthrough, but honestly I think this is mobile gaming done right, so I'm giving it 8.5.
And now it's time for news with the Goose.
Thanks, guys. Microsoft has announced the Xbox One's Kinect will soon be disconnected. Starting next month, the new consoles will be available without the motion sensing device. The move is a stark contrast to the company's earlier messaging, stating the Xbox One would never ship without a Kinect. This also means game developers can no longer assume that all Xbox One owners will have a Kinect, putting it in equal standing with the Xbox 360. The Kinect sensor will remain available as an optional console bundle and will be released as a standalone standalone device at a later date. Independently developed Steam Greenlight game Towns has been abandoned by its developers. In spite of poor critical reception, the game has sold over 200,000 copies since its release in 2012, under the promise that the game would continue to be developed and completed. The developers have no plans to issue refunds to those who have already purchased the game, which will now be left in an unfinished state. And in budget news, the Australian Classification Review Board will be merged with several other government agencies, including the Administrative Appeals Tribunal and the Refugee Review Tribunal. The new amalgamated body, which is yet to be named, will assume all responsibilities for evaluating and amending classification decisions. It should be noted, however, that the classification of games and other media will continue to be performed separately by the existing classification board. And that's all the news for this week.
Thanks, Goose. Bound by Flame is hard.
Get me out of here! I kinda have my hands full right now.
Bound by Flame is an action RPG brought to us by French developer Spiders. An evil army of dead walkers and their masters, the Ice Lords, are travelling from the north to kill and freeze everything in their path. The Ice Lords are coming.
Each battle only served to swell their ranks with the defeated dead.
Two factions, the Elves and a group of scholars known as the Red Scribes, are doing everything they can to win the war.
You can play either as a beardy or lady Vulcan, who's part of a mercenary army led by a Sean Connery impersonator.
This is not my first walk in the wilds, arsewipe.
You're put in charge of protecting the Red Scribes as they perform an important ritual, but things don't go to plan. Imbued with this power of the flame, you're now a key force in stopping the war.
This is an ambitious RPG from a small team. It's aiming for challenging RPG combat and a rich universe of characters to explore.
There's something in the air that stinks.
There's even a Dragon Age style companion system.
If I tag along with you, I might at least get to know you better.
But with a AAA price tag for console versions, it's hard to forgive the game's many flaws.
Yes, there are some major issues with this game holding back its potential, but there's also some very good work. I think the best part about the game is actually the art.
This is Valvanor.
I just think it's really beautiful, Hex. Once you get past that first area, there's some nice high-res textures and backdrops.
Yeah, I agree, and the music is a real standout too. Levels and areas you quest in are a little bit claustrophobic and cluttered though. This does encourage you to use the environment to divide and conquer enemies and avoid ranged attacks, which is a good thing. But it's also quite frustrating to navigate, especially when you can't drop down off small ledges or go into shallow water. I hate that, Bajo. It feels so dated now. Either put up a fence or just let me drop down.
Yeah, in fairness, it doesn't happen that much, but still it drives me to a particularly high level of madness. But I did like all the detail in this world and the art style, especially the gear, which looks so good, and I wasn't expecting that from such a small team. There's stacks of armor and weapons to collect. And if you put in a certain treasure-finding perk, you can busy yourself for quite a while hunting down the ringing hints of nearby loot. I got a bit obsessed with that, Hex.
Yeah, it taps into that Nirnroot madness, doesn't it? There are 3 class trees. The warrior uses 2-handed weapons, the ranger focuses on dual daggers and stealth, and pyromancy, which feeds off your bound flame. The tech trees are well thought out. There are a lot of interesting perks and bonuses which make a massive difference to the combat. And that's part of the problem. It's just totally unbalanced.
Yeah, so much so that I felt like I couldn't even get through certain fights without specific perks from the tech trees. It just makes things unnecessarily hard, I think, even on easy.
Yeah, if you're gonna have an easy setting in a game, you know, make it actually easy.
Yeah, absolutely. I also felt like the fundamental issue is really that enemies have too much health. Even the plants are jerks.
Yeah, when you see just a tiny sliver of health disappear after a big attack, it is quite disheartening.
Yeah, and the enemies do so much damage as well, and it is quite hard to block their attacks. There's just not enough telegraphing. Fights usually turn into a tug of war of blocking and swinging where you can, praying that you'll get a hit in. Oh, and the boss's Hex. They feel like they're on loan from a vanilla WoW 40-person raid. I just was left wondering, how am I going to get through this fight more than once?
You're encouraged to counter as much as possible by blocking at the last second, which sends the game into a short bit of slow motion. And there are perks to improve counter damage, but it's never really enough to reward you for your careful timing.
Yeah, I felt like the more successful fights I had were because of unseen dice rolls on gear that had lots of interrupt stats. They kept enemies off my back.
I also felt like some of my hits weren't connecting properly, or maybe enemies just weren't reacting to them. And tough enemies knock you down quite a lot, and they keep swinging at you with no way to avoid taking massive damage, even if you have the perk that lets you get up quicker. It's just relentless, isn't it?
Yeah, this game likes to hit you when you're down. And if you get backed into a corner and the camera kind of gets in the way, oh, it's just tears. I'm tempted to mention Dark Souls because there are some similarities in how you lock onto enemies and avoid attacks, but the difference with Dark Souls is it's challenging because you can see that a fight is winnable. It might take you a few goes, but it's not based around luck, it's based around your own skill. This just felt a bit unfair.
Yeah, I get the impression that they were trying to make something like Dark Souls, which is unique and challenging, and I do like that fights are a tough tussle with enemies, making you utilize all potions and crossbows and traps at your disposal. But they just didn't nail down that delicate balance of skill versus punishment.
Yeah, I think this game really highlights how hard it must be making something as perfect as Dark Souls. With Bound by Flame, I felt like my skill never mattered enough to counter the enemies the game threw at me.
The creature design is really incredible though. And there are some interesting attack patterns and effects. If only they were fun to fight, Bajo.
Indeed. There is quite a lot of story and characters written into this game, and I thought some of the performances were pretty good.
These powers of yours are interesting.
Oh, really? No way. I thought all the writing and the voice work was awful.
God damn it, Captain. This is an important battle. You have to include the blades in it.
Now you listen closely, Ulcan. I am the captain of this company. It's me who decides. You don't like it? Not my problem.
It just didn't seem quite right to me. Too much of a mishmash of accents and ideas.
Well, it could be a test to see if I'm being a good soldier, General Sir.
I do appreciate the amount of dialogue in the game, but also motion capture has come so far in recent years that it's quite difficult to endure these wobbly scenes.
If you do not resist, it will crush your soul.
Hey, take it easy. One day at a time, okay? I'm gonna take a walk.
I didn't mind that so much, but I was craving more character development and backstories. I can't even tell you much about the main character, Vulcan, except he whinges a lot.
I'm just a pissed off mercenary who's gonna get his ass chewed out big time as soon as we get to camp.
And he's randomly rude to people.
Several of the villagers have been behaving curiously of late.
They're just hungover. You'd know if you got drunk more often. And you look like you need to.
Is it true you killed the beast?
Is it true you quit the booze?
I did like the idea of the main character having this demon trapped inside them, though, maybe trying to take control or free himself.
I must endure your wailings and lamentations. Pitiful.
It's an interesting conflict, and apparently some of your actions in regards to this do have consequences. But the demon's dialogue does seem to have a lot of thous and doths in it to make him seem a little bit more arcane and ancient.
Thou didst hold the power to face the necromancers, yet thou didst flee.
What the?
Yeah, it does feel a bit forced, doesn't it? Overall, I gave the dialogue a really good go, but it's hard when you're not invested in the characters. And the biggest problem I had with this game was committing. I was just so frustrated at the gameplay. Deep down, I knew I wasn't on board with the story, so after a while, I just unintentionally zoned out a bit.
All right.
Just follow the markers, just keep questing. Just keep questing.
I can appreciate this game was made by a small team, and really the devs should be applauded for much of the work here. But at the same time, it just feels like it was overreaching a bit.
Yeah, it does feel a bit overambitious, doesn't it? Maybe if they aimed a bit smaller, we'd get a more balanced and focused game.
Yeah, there's just too many rough edges that tip the scales into making this not an enjoyable experience. Perhaps if you persist and really get into the crafting and stats, you might find some joy in the long fights. But for me, this was an affair of frustration, so I doth give it 4.
Hex, I have a confession to make. I haven't finished this game. I had a rage delete about 8 hours in.
It's never a good sign when you feel the need to remove the game from your PC.
I wanted to keep going. I do believe there is a really fun game in there somewhere. It's just so hard to get to, and I think most people will probably quit after a couple of hours. So I doth give it 4 as well.
I saved our asses, and you're all just, hey, what's for lunch?
Last week's federal budget saw a range of planned cuts to the arts community, and unfortunately game developers could be one of the hardest hit.
Goose looks at how the abolishment of the Australian Interactive Games Fund is likely to affect local games development.
Here in Australia, we love making games almost as much as we love playing them. So back in 2013, the government set up a fund to help us do just that.
Australia's always had a really good heritage in creativity in games, and I think the goal of the fund was to stimulate that.
And the idea was that there was money for project funding and enterprise funding, so the idea was really to build up existing studios to be sustainable.
Suddenly there were a lot more game artists and development opportunities started popping up everywhere, and they were all startups.
I think without the funding we would have been making the same game, but it would have taken 3-4 years. By the time we'd finished that game, it would have kind of almost been obsolete. So that funding kind of allowed us, to really focus. We definitely wouldn't be in the same place we were in right now.
Towncraft started toward the end of 2011. For us to get it out on the iPad took 2 years. And after we had the grant to get the game from iPad to iPhone and Mac, it took 6 months.
So, as you can imagine, last week's announcement to cut the Australian Interactive Games Fund came as a shock to many in the industry.
When I heard the funding was cut, I would have thought the industry had an opportunity to kind of fight for the fund, and it was a fair fight. But when I actually found out no one had been consulted in the industry at all, I almost felt like it was a mistake. They just saw games and then just thought, oh, we'll cut it there.
I think it's not wise of them to maybe cut this so quickly, and that's probably my biggest gripe personally with it, is just the lack of time they gave it to look at results.
The structure was really good. It was what the industry wanted, and it wasn't even a large amount of money. So the money we're talking about is $10 million.
That's where I think if the government had consulted with the industry, they probably would have seen where it's more than just games is a very powerful word. People just think it's one thing. There's a whole industry behind it, and I think that we haven't had the chance to prove it.
But is it even fair to assume that the government should be helping to fund the gaming industry in the first place?
It is the government's responsibility to run these programs, because what it means is you've got a diverse economy and you've got a diverse culture. We can't have a culture which is just built around finance and mining. That is an incredibly boring culture.
I don't think that a lot of companies wanted the government to fund them forever. They just needed a boost.
Look, I'm always very pro a media sector that is self-sustaining and profitable in its own right. It's the only way that we can keep competitive internationally as well as locally. I think what the fund did was act as a catalyst for new businesses and new enterprises and new products. And that is always important. Ultimately, we have to be self-sustaining.
Most indie game success stories have nothing to do with government grants whatsoever. They've got to do with making an amazing game that the world wants and needs.
Unfortunately, Federal Arts Minister George Brandis declined to respond to us about this issue. But regardless of why this cut was made, if it's not opposed or completely overturned, there'll no doubt be a whole range of short and long-term effects on the industry.
If you're a small indie team and you're trying to expand a bit, it's going to be a little bit of a hit for those guys, because it was a great opportunity that was letting them move forward, and they might have to reel their plans back a bit now for a while and find other opportunities and stuff. For everyone who's big or everyone who's smaller than that, it's not going to change anything at all.
I think the effect will be we'll slip back into where we were before, so a lot of people focusing on contract work while they're making ends meet. So we'll kind of get there eventually, but just not as quickly as we would have with the money.
I think a lot of people are going to suffer from it. I don't really know what the future's going to hold anymore, so I think I'm going to have to figure out some different options.
The games industry is not going to die, I hope, as a result of this. And I think if we can think more commercially around the way that we develop our games, then that's got to be a good thing.
And now we delve into the dark recesses of the mind with Ether 1.
Moments, like stars, are passing me by. burning so bright and so fast as if they never truly existed at all. They're so beautiful, so fragile. I want to hold on to them. I want to hold on and never let them go. Why can't I hold on anymore?
In Ether 1, you take the role of a restorer, a kind of memory technician working for a company that uses their scientific advancements to help patients suffering from dementia.
The Ishin Initiative discovered and developed new ways of mapping the human mind, expanding the knowledge of our species.
Right away, though, you're not instilled with a whole heap of confidence in the organisation. There's a bit of an Aperture Science vibe going on, hints at shady experiments gone awry, and locked doors.
Sometimes these procedures don't, how should I put it, go to plan.
Yeah, not to mention I'm always super sus whenever there's some disembodied voice talking you through everything. In this case, a lady named Phyllis.
My name is Dr. Edmonds, but you can call me Phyllis if you like.
Now, come on Phyllis, why can't we just chat about this face to face before I sit in that creepy chair and go inception hopping through some random's brain?
Nevertheless, you jump in and the memories you explore are both touching and sad.
Right, let's try to make sense of all of this.
The mind in question is a 69-year-old woman named Jean, who lived in a British village called Pinwheel near a coal mine. There's some really lovely lighting and colour to the landscape as you explore these hazy fragments of Jean's life.
Just listening to that melody would never get old.
Yeah, I like the fact that there's this almost idyllic glow to everything, as if maybe this town wasn't quite so perfect, but perhaps she has a fond association with it, so she just remembers it that way.
Yeah, it's all very dreamlike, isn't it? As you explore, you come across ribbons, which represent memory fragments that need to be restored. And you can choose to simply drift through this game, focusing on unravelling the story, and treating it more as a walk-em-up. But to truly understand the scattered puzzle that is Jean's mind, there are much more complex problems to solve, if you choose to take them on.
Yeah, I really liked this. It basically gives you a bare-bones experience that is perfectly substantial on its own in terms of narrative. But for the player that wants a more hands-on and challenging experience, they have the option to uncover a whole lot more. And honestly, once you pull at a thread, it's hard not to see where it's going to lead.
This is what's causing the symptoms of dementia in our patient.
Yeah, it's nice and inviting with its cloudy mystery that surrounds a significant event that happened in the town.
Yeah, you do your fair share of detective work, don't you? Reading notes, there's a lot of recurring imagery of a lighthouse that may lead to some tangible clue, or perhaps it's a metaphor conjured by her mind. Either way, you want to go deeper.
Solving puzzles generally involves the use of objects you find around each area. You can only ever carry one item at a time though, so you need to teleport back and forth between your sort of mental home-based chamber and Jean's memories, so you can store objects you think might be useful.
Yes, and Phyllis is always letting you know that you could need any one of these objects later on to solve a task, which instills a kind of paranoia in you to just grab everything, because you never know, right?
Let's get some pockets. Well, I need this cup.
A teapot. Maybe I'll need to make a cup of tea later.
Beer. I could need beer. Better grab it.
Yes, and that chamber ends up being a kind of kleptomaniac's trophy room. But at least it does allow you to keep everything pretty organised, which is a blessing when it comes to puzzle solving.
This is also one of those games with lots of keys and codes for doors to unlock.
Okay.
So it's handy having a pen and paper to write them all down, and by the end of it, Hex, my book was a bit of a scribbled mess.
Yeah, mine too, and rarely does a key or a code unlock a door that's close by. And in fact, I never found the doors to some of the codes I wrote down, but the more I struggled to access these secrets and memories, the more I realised this all serves as a really well thought out metaphor for an elderly woman's mind that can, in essence, no longer access the locked doors containing her precious memories.
Dementia is really interesting subject matter for a video game, isn't it? And how intensely you search for meaning in this experience is really up to you.
Yeah, I mean, there is enough of a sci-fi element here that you could be content to just play this as a memory-themed puzzle solver. And there is some serious challenge to all the memories and tasks should you decide to take them on.
But if you allow yourself to consider the meaning behind the narrative and what the puzzles are aiming to represent, then it can be quite a moving experience as well.
Yes, and ultimately this will differ for each player, which is why I think it's great that they've provided the option to just casually wander through or strive to unlock every secret. This is one of those games that's not going to be for everyone, but for me it was a really thoughtful balance of guided narrative and hands-on activity.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed this much more than I thought I would. Though I do wish they employed a few more inventive ways of driving the narrative than just through notes and letters that are always left on tables for some reason.
Yeah, it's exactly the kind of game that could have played with delivering those snippets in a more interesting way.
Like that moment where the camera flashes, revealing a memory from a birthday party. That was such a clever way to deliver that fragment of story, and I just wish they played with those ideas a bit more. Still, I found this very unique.
Me too. It's an interesting way to deal with a sensitive subject of a deteriorating mind. You know, it's not an arty waffle through a forest. There's challenge and mystery there too. So I'm giving it 7.5 out of 10.
I'm giving it 7 out of 10.
Oh, this is excellent.
So, did you name the game for this week? Whoa. It was Sherlock Holmes versus Jack the Ripper. Released in 2009, this point-and-click adventure saw you taking on the role of merry old London's greatest detective, hunting down one of the most notorious villains ever. The main mechanic of the game was reconstructing crime scenes and forming a conclusion, all the while with Dr. Watson at your side. And it's our Name the Game because the 360 version was developed by Spiders, the same team behind this week's Bound by Flame.
Next week, the one-man army BJ Blazkowicz is back in Wolfenstein: The New Order.
Captain Blazkowicz, still fighting after all these years.
Plus, we are politely informed, sir, you are being hunted.
And if you like golf, Mario, and touring the world, then you're in luck, because over on ABC3 on Spawn Point this weekend, we have a look at Mario Golf World Tour.
Until next time, may all your games be good ones. Hex out.
Bajo out.
That's weird. Infinity Hex. Snaky arms Bajo.
See my butt looks like.